what you'd expect, which is if healthcare were a customer-centric business rather than a physician-centric business, perhaps, what would it look like? And I would encourage everyone listening to at least go through that thought exercise. If we had to eat our own dog food, if we were our own consumers, what sort of experience would we like? And in turn, how do we design and build for that experience? From the top down, that's the central hypothesis of New Hope. Having the AI answer the front desk is exactly that. Like if we have all of those questions organized, taken care of, fed into our medical record system in a, highly reliable and auditable manner, what does that open the space for? Well, when the patient walks into the room or office, all of that is done. And so
Yeah.
when they walk into the exam room, I don't have to check their insurance. I don't have to check their demographics like people in the early micro practices had to do. That time moves out of our precious one-on-one interaction time. This is where I may get in trouble with my colleagues, but I'm going to say what I'm going to say. I think that there are subspecialties, certainly of medicine, where AI makes more sense. Things where it's a standard set of tests that you're going to order. It's a standard set of outputs. And the British Medical Journal did a series on the value of physical examination. I encourage folks, if they're interested, to find it. By the way, it will be difficult because of what they were finding. But the summary there is that I do think that there are going to be places in internal medicine, entire subspecialties of medicine, where an AI will do at least a good job, if not, dare I say,
Wow.
potentially even better because of the ability to keep an AI up to date and things like that.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Scaling Practice Management, the show where we help practice managers grow smarter, not harder. My name is Jakub Grajcar. I'm the head of marketing at Talkie AI, where we help medical practices stop the phone from ringing off the hook and unburden their front desk team with AI medical receptionist agents. And we're already helping over 300,000 patients every month. And my guest today is Dr. Zeshan Rajput. Zeeshan is a physician, clinical informaticist, and MBA who spent over 15 years at the intersection of medicine and technology, from implementing EHR systems to advising on federal health IT strategy. Now he's building a new medical practice from the ground up, designed to use AI and automation to slash overhead and reinvest in the doctor-patient relationship. And we'll dig into that today, definitely. Zeeshan, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
I am fantastic. Thank you for having me. This is going to be an absolute joy.
Yes. The first question I have for you is from one of our team members.
Sure.
They were asking, because the name of your practice is going to be...
Oh, yes. It's New Hope Primary Care.
Exactly. And the question from one of our team members was, is it a Star Wars reference or not? Settle the debate.
Fun story. So, this is our second venture named this way. The first was a boat that we lived on for 2.5 years. And
Okay.
when we named that boat A New Hope, I did reach out to Disney and ask, are they okay if we put, the name on the boat? Could we do some decals, some logos, things like that? And they were like, absolutely not. We don't release our license for anything.
Cease and desist.
Cease and desist. So while yes, I would like to say that New Hope is inspired by our hopes and dreams for, healthcare in this country and worldwide and all of that, I cannot deny nor acknowledge any sort of Star Wars reference.
I understand. All clear. And thank you for... Well, that is such an interesting answer. That's even better than I hoped for. Amazing. That's great. So we'll talk about New Hope in in just a second here.
Absolutely.
Any similarity accidental. But first,
100%.
yeah. So before we dig into everything related to practice management, we'll play the warm-up game.
Yeah.
It's becoming a little bit of a tradition already on the show. So the warm-up game has 2 stages. First, please pick 3 numbers from 1 to 10.
2, 7, and 4.
2, 7, and 4. Okay, so the categories you picked are food, talent, and fun. And then,
Okay.
and now, for which category would you like a question from? Food, talent, or fun?
Let's go in that order.
You can only pick one, actually.
Oh, well, yeah. So you started with food, so let's go with food.
Okay, well, a lot of people actually pick that category, even if it's totally random. They do say two a lot. So, what's your favorite meal in the world? A favorite meal to cook, or maybe a meal that brings back memories? Tell us about what food you like.
So I'll do the most recent love. So I am Pakistani by cultural background, and so my mother never taught me to cook for cultural reasons. Men don't cook, etc., etc. And
I see.
so I have been trying to perfect a chicken curry for years now, and I have the pot. It's called a karai, or and I've made countless curries. I have my own mix of masalas and everything like that. And the reason I'm particularly passionate about this today is because within the last day or two, Epicurious released their video on how to make this Indian style chicken curry. And so
Mm.
I've been watching it and taking notes and going into great detail, comparing their techniques to mine, their marinade and everything. So I'd say front of mind right now is a Indian style chicken curry.
Very interesting. What's Epicurious? Sorry.
Oh, it's a one of a thousand. I think they had a presence prior to YouTube, but they've certainly had success in streaming various food
Okay.
related content. A lot of things in the New York City area, like, different restaurants and things like that. But also they bring on chefs and they talk about food preparation and do meal prep in their kitchen and things like that.
All right, interesting, interesting. Yeah, there's certainly a ton of cooking content out there. We would probably have more reach if this were a cooking show, or maybe not, more competition. I'm not sure. But anyway, thank you for answering that question. Um, hmm. When you said recent obsession cooking wise, I think in the last year or so I got really into ramen. I was never much of a
Uh-huh.
ramen guy, but I found this such a great place, and I've been having that ramen very regularly. The portions are huge, and it's kind of a
Uh-huh.
challenge even for me to consume. But honestly, a good ramen is so nutritious, and it makes me feel so good. So yeah,
Oh, they're
that,
absolutely delicious.
that's a great addiction, a lovely addiction to have. Thank you for answering that question. And we've got a lot of ground to cover, so let's dig into practice management
Yeah.
next. Continuing the tradition of the show, now you're getting the traditional question of the more informative and insightful kind of the show. Zeeshan, what is your number one tip for successfully growing a healthcare practice?
When I saw this question, I laughed a little bit because we're going live next month, right?
Right.
And so I would say historically, when I've been involved in growth opportunities in various health systems, I'd say where we found success was meeting the customer where they were, if you will. And so the my most historical or longest length of time at any given health system is a large academic medical center here in the US, and of extremely high repute. And so their customers are willing to overcome some level of difficulty, if the waiting room is a little bit longer, or, time in the waiting room is a little bit longer, or it takes the provider a little bit to get in the room, things like that. It's okay because they are the academic medical center. And I'd say,
Uh-huh.
we're not, launching this under any, there or any particular branding. So we don't have, existing brand to lean on. But just importantly, there's a great line of work around, and I think even a book, if, and I may misremember the title, but it's What If Disney Ran Your Hospital? No relation to previous conversation, but it's got
Of
the
course not.
same sort of what you'd expect, which is if healthcare were a customer centric business rather than a physician centric business, perhaps, what would it look like? And I would encourage everyone listening to at least go through that thought exercise as we are in the design and build out of this practice, and just think, if we had to eat our own dog food, if we were our own consumers, what sort of experience would we like? And in turn, how do we design and build for that experience?
That's really cool. Yeah, I've heard it called the golden rule. Treat others as you like to be treated. And
100%.
honestly, if one rule were to be called the golden rule, this is a good pick. This is a good pick. I'm fascinated by the book that you mentioned. I
Yeah.
looked it up. If Disney ran your hospital,
Uh-huh.
9.5 things you would do differently. So, is there anything you can share from that book that kind of stuck with you?
I mean, the biggest thing is just if I were to frame the book in a mindset, I mean, Disney is an exemplar at customer service, right? I mean, they literally, like, you can send your executive team or whomever to Disney and have them trained in their methodologies around
Mm,
customer service and I was about to say patient satisfaction, customer satisfaction. And so I think rather than going into detail around each of the 9 things, just the mindset, just double underline that, think through, what would your front door look like? What would your greeting look like? What would what would the wait times be like? What would the waiting room experience look like? And I think, Disney's obviously evolving the art and science in this space as well. You can go to some of their more recent developments and see how they're reimagining things like waiting queues, how they're reimagining the experience in between attractions, in between entertainment, in between dining. And so I think those interstitial spaces, as much as the book is fascinating and a wonderful read, I think also thinking about the journey in those interstitial spaces, not just the Press-Ganey question that a lot of the healthcare folks in America will know. Things like, how many minutes did your physician spend in the room? Did you feel like all of your questions were answered? Equally important is the time outside that space,
mm.
and part of what we're doing at New Hope is designing our experience from the entryway out to just be our standard. Our milestone is to make every moment of that patient journey an actual joy.
Yeah, I see. I see. And that's a thread we'll definitely pull on in just a moment here. Before
Yeah.
we look, to the next chapter, to New Hope and your plans for that, I wanted to tap into a little bit of your past experience
Yeah,
because
of course.
you spent over 15 years in clinical informatics, right?
Yeah.
We mentioned before implementing EHRs, leading health AI initiatives, and even advising at the federal level. And I'm wondering what your take is on, technology in healthcare in general. Typically, the way I like to frame this is, what are the most common mistakes or the common failure points? And, if you were to speak to a room of 200, 2,000 practice managers about how they should be thinking about technology as they run a healthcare practice, what would you share with them from that vast experience?
Yeah. So there's a wealth of, knowledge and literature and everything around early failures in informatics, right? Like,
Mm,
how, what do you need to do to survive your go live? What does your pre-go live flight list look like? What does your go live list look like? What does your security strategy need to look like? How are you addressing the 3 Ps that always, are your first, second, and third tier failures in a go live: printers, passwords, policies. And so I would urge folks to think, those are obviously very important questions. Making sure that you actually go live with the technology is critical in step one. But the question that I like to bring into the room is, what ROI are you targeting? And how
mm-hmm.
are you measuring that? And what levers and dials will you have if you're not on the trajectory to achieve the very thing that you're trying to get out of this implementation? And that question has evolved during my career. So in the late 90s, early 2000s, and by the way, I got to informatics a decade after this, so this is historical
Yeah.
knowledge for me. But certainly the folks I trained under, they lived this. But in the 90s and 2000s, it was the wave of meaningful use in the US. And so hospitals, health systems were under legislated pressure to implement these electronic medical record systems. So the ROI question was off the table. This was a requirement. And so
Mm-hmm.
now when we look at these sort of technology products that especially with the current administration's focus, those waves of regulated force change are certainly, they're coming onto the shore less frequently, and they're less destructive, if you will, to borrow our beach analogy one step further. But
Mm,
equally, so now health IT projects are a little bit more optional, and sometimes you have the health IT project that you have to do, and there your ROI is simple. This is a security upgrade that we need to do. This is a malware protection strategy we need to implement. This is a cloud strategy so that we can get out of on-prem hosting, et cetera, et cetera. All those projects, you can delineate the ROI. But equally, when we look at, for example, Talkie or similar, technologies and strategies, knowing what we are trying to get out of it ahead of time, and positioning ourselves for that success pre-go live, along with obviously surviving the implementation, but post go live refinement, optimization, and tuning, I would say is the number one fail that I have seen in my career. It's the number one thing I've had to focus on. The implementation window is this much, and then it's the optimization window where you've endured this pain, either financial or workflow or what have you. You've implemented this technology, and now it's time to reap the rewards and positioning yourself for success, not only to achieve those rewards, measure those rewards, but ultimately, and probably most importantly, to celebrate them so that you develop the energy to tackle the next project.
Yeah. Okay. So if you could dumb it down for me just a
Yeah.
moment. The way I understood it is people don't do the math pre-implementation of technology, so they don't actually ask themselves, are we going to save money doing this or actually lose money doing this? For example, implementing front desk automation. Am I on the right track here, or
Kind of, sort.
they
Yeah.
wonder?
So, and it may not be a dollars and cents thing, right? So
Yeah.
when we talked about Talkie, this is a brand new practice. We're starting from ground zero. There are no
Yes.
patients lined up.
Yeah.
Why are we implementing this now? And what I mentioned to you is that our ROI here isn't necessarily your traditional metrics. I'm not looking to divert X number of patient calls within the first month or Y value. What I'm trying to do is develop, a unique market offering, which one part of it is we are a technology forward organization that reaps those benefits and reinvests them in the doctor-patient relationship. So
Right.
to establish that at the most critical juncture, our front door, we pulled the trigger today. We said, let's implement this technology because when our patients first interact with us, we want it to be on the right foot. So our ROI is less tangible. And that's an acceptable thing. But I think critically to what your question is, knowing what we're trying to get out of it, positioning ourselves for that success, in this case, putting your technology and similar ones that we're implementing on the right pedestals in the right frame so that it is A, positioned most for success, and B, we are in turn positioned to derive the most value out of it.
Yeah, and first of all, I mean, this is important context, right? As you're launching your practice Talkie, I'm happy to say it's going to be part of of the way you run it, and it's going to be manning the front desk, so to speak.
That's right.
Really excited to hear more about that. And if you're watching this on the Talkie YouTube and it's 6 months from now, probably we'll already have like a case study conversation somewhere on the channel. So
Looking
look
forward
that
to
up.
it.
Yes, me as well, me as well. Also on the subject of ROI, I wanted to plug just one recent blog post that we did because it slots so perfectly into this conversation. We just published a piece called "How Much Do Missed Calls Cost a Medical Practice?" And we actually even have an embedded calculator in there, so you can actually see the monthly or annual revenue that's at risk, just for
Yeah.
like appointment scheduling conversations, how many appointments you might not be scheduling through the missed calls. So that's something that we'll put in the show notes. To dig a little bit deeper into this subject, though, you mentioned something in passing, and this is the thing with with people with expertise. I do that too all the time, right? As a marketer, I'll mention like inbound versus outbound, or I mention like anything else in that, and people are gonna stop me and say, "Okay, what do you mean by that?" Now you mentioned these 3 tiers of failure. Printers, passwords, and policies.
Yep.
And I have this inkling that some people listening to this might not know about this, and it seems like a useful framework to think about technological potential failure. So could you expand on that just a little bit?
I absolutely can. It's a very perhaps specific thing, but it's
Uh-huh.
real, battle scars, bruises, and I actually can't
Hmm.
take credit for the term. consultant by the name of Bill that I worked with over a decade ago was the one that put it in my head. But long story short, if you're at a hospital and you're implementing a medical record system, the three things that invariably go wrong: one, your order is not printing to the right printer or what have you, and you need to track where it printed down and correct that mapping. Two, the users that you trained 6 to 12 weeks prior and put them through dozens of hours of medical records training, they forgot their password. And so knowing that it's very tactical things, right? Policy might be the most interesting one, which is that certainly when you implement a medical record system in the United States, you're wiring or rewiring the very nervous system of how your health system operates. There's no more intrusive informatics project or even perhaps general project. I would rather move a hospital from one physical site to another than do an EMR implementation in terms of amount of energy you need to invest in making sure that that transition works. Now, I may be biased because I'm on the information side, but the point I'm raising is that when you implement those systems, your legacy policies are usually the next line of failure. In other words, you were trying to do business X way before you implement this new way of doing business, this new system that expects your workflows to be X and things to be Y. And all of a sudden, the way you do business, the way that you operate, your clinical workflows, your policies need to evolve as well.
I'm tempted to ask just one question. What would you
Please
say
do.
to 2000 practices about the way they manage their passwords? Because I'm picturing sticky notes. I'm picturing sticky notes with with the password right on that. That's not
Yeah.
secure at all. So is there a good fix for it, or is that a whole new podcast episode?
We can definitely talk about security strategy to,
Yeah,
until the cows come home, perhaps. I'd say the
yeah.
two things are: passwords are notoriously vulnerable,
Mm,
especially rotating password policies where exactly as you said, I forget, I have my second, third, fourth password, but once I get to the sixth, seventh, eighth, I'm not going to remember what I did. And it times
yeah.
out every 30 days. So two-factor authentication is probably the number one thing in the security strategy. Very very academically, authenticate the person by something they are, something they know, and something they have, and
Mm.
pick two of those factors and design, make sure that that's part of your security strategy. And then, especially as we get to the today, and we can talk about the design of New Hope, but it's highly, software as a service, even service as a service, and
Mm-hmm.
zero trust architecture in these sorts of modalities. And that, rather than imagining that your VPN is going to be some holy and sacred site that never gets penetrated, just zero trust at every level of the interactions where it makes sense without, irreparably damaging your relationship with the people that you're serving. But some level of zero trust, I think, needs to be part of anybody's security strategy now.
Interesting, interesting. And yeah, that's definitely a thread we could pull on as we go forward. But I also did want to ask you about New Hope, and I feel like let's go there
Of course.
for right now. So tell me, because you're building a new medical practice, not just a new one as in a one that's kind of starting from the ground up, but also you're building it in a new way. So tell me about that. How is New Hope going to be different? Why did you decide to build it that way? Why decide on a completely new practice overall instead of maybe acquiring and modifying an existing one?
Yeah, all of those were options, and all of those were heavily debated. So let me start with the premise, and then some of the other
Mm,
questions, we can explain them in that. The premise is actually, for anyone paying attention to the current business literature or even the regular media, I don't think it's surprising, which is that this, revolution that we're in, this emergence of artificial intelligence and other advanced algorithms, is yielding new operational efficiencies that we haven't had the opportunity to take advantage of in every facet of, humanity right now. And so, just as software development firms are rethinking what their staffing looks like in the wake of AI being able to do, handle merge requests and even entire low-level tickets, migrate, code from one library to the other. And all of these tasks that traditionally took developer teams, significant amounts of time to accomplish. The same questions are from the ground up what we asked about healthcare. Is there an opportunity for these newer technologies to change the way that we structure an entire practice, a clinical workflow from the ground up? And so we sat down with an exercise and thought about, okay, what are the opportunities in the workflow that are amenable to these technologies? What are the ones where we absolutely have to keep a person in the loop? What are the ones where there's where the Venn diagram is right, where either it's AI first in human review or human first in AI review? So when we went through that exercise, tiering all of that, looking at our staffing strategies and everything, that led us to the identification that all of the efficiencies that we were identifying, it made far more sense to implement them from a fresh slate, from ground up, rather than implement try and retrofit them onto a legacy infrastructure. And it's the same thing as if you were, you're renovating a home or retrofitting a ship or another vessel. In that it invariably, like, you have very small bulkheads, very small pathways for every amount of wire that needs to traverse from one area of the ship to another. And anytime you retrofit, you're trying to jam one more wire into that conduit, one more space. You have all of the cost of that legacy infrastructure that becomes very difficult to rewire. In the case of the clinical office and Talkie AI, for example, one of the things I mentioned to you is that I can go to any academic medical center in our area and you walk in and there's a bank of receptionists, a bank of people waiting to meet you and, take your information and, get you checked in for your appointment. But if we were to implement a system like yours, we need to reevaluate that. And that's a very, it can be a very tense, human relations question around how do you take care of your people? What's the right way to deal with them? And we can get into the philosophy of how we're handling that reskilling, upskilling, layoffs, and all of the things that are happening in the wake of all of the tremendous change in the world. But to summarize, when we looked at the opportunities for, again, implementing New Hope, thinking about what we were trying to achieve, how we were going to maximize it, and in turn, how were we going to build the organizational infrastructure to best leverage and maximize it. That's what sort of led us to that fresh canvas strategy.
So you said something very interesting here along the way. It's almost like you were slicing this pie into 4 slices, 4 categories, if you will. Work, in terms of dividing the work that's human only, human first, and AI reviews, AI first and humans review, and then I assume some part of the work that might be AI only.
Yeah.
Depends on, So I'm wondering, I think a practice manager would be really curious about this. What did you put in each category that, might be interesting or surprising? How did you actually divide that work?
Sure. Well, first, credit where credit is due. That mental framework, I first heard it from Dr. Mark Kramer. So credits to him if he happens to be listening to this.
Okay.
But when we looked at what goes into each bucket, certainly from a informatics perspective, as well as from a clinical perspective, our first question was risk. In other words, what tasks that if the AI runs into an error, that's okay. And if not, how do we redesign it? So when we looked at, a solution, there's the possibility that there is a completely unmonitored version of Talkie, right? Where, I could, in, a couple of hours, especially with the way the current coding tools are, I could create something, wire it to a text-to-speech engine, expose that through a voice over IP, and we could have something similar. And the point there is, and what, solutions like yours bring to the table is that that's not the right, that's not the right risk posture for your front
Mm,
door. Like that needs
mm,
to be maybe, maybe not clinical reliability where we talk about high, that is like flying an airplane levels of reliability when you are rendering clinical information. But similarly, you can't mess up your front door. I'm talking to a marketing person. You can
yeah,
tell
of course.
me, it's critical. And
Hmm.
so that's where something like where you all have very intelligently designed your solution, where it is, AI with human review and constant monitoring, constant tweaking, constant improvement. That's where we would put in those buckets something like that. Something that we could fully automate to AI is things like, for example, our scheduled reviews and, our optimizations there. And even then, there's still obviously humans in the loop in that. So it's not a completely agentic workflow. Like I was reading earlier today that some software development firms had put all of their like Jira tickets and things into a completely agentic framework where at least the
Mm,
AI makes a pass at it first, comes up with, takes the ticket, tries and develops a solution, and then even then that still present like the actual merge in the example I was reading, the actual merge is reviewed by a human. But
hmm.
and we can talk a little bit by, in those instances the human isn't reviewing the code, the human's reviewing the the summary. So it's sort of the meta response of what the code is. And yeah, they can dive in where it makes sense, but I think intrinsically that's where I would differentiate an AI only strategy versus those various levels of AI
Right.
and human in the loop. And then ultimately, there are things that either for risk stratification or for, just the interaction and the experience that we want to keep, just human to human, very little technology in the loop. Our entire clinical workflow is actually designed around that premise. So when a patient walks into New Hope, the technology is almost out of the frame. We'll represent that, yes, we are using AI. There's an ambient AI transcribing the appointment and things like that. But when you walk into New Hope, you actually see the waiting room has panoramic windows overlooking acres of protected woodlands in the Columbia, Maryland area. And it's
Wow,
designed to
that's
build this
great.
very natural vibe that is at once, hopefully welcoming, natural, serene, but equally from a business design and marketing perspective differentiates us a little bit from sterile waiting rooms.
Sounds great. I need to see a picture of that.
100%. I need to see it when it gets built.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. This reminded me of a question that I got on a podcast recently where I was a guest. And the question was, what is something that 100% should not be outsourced to AI? Because you mentioned human to human interaction. What I said
Yeah.
in response is, if I were to, that was actually the question. If I were to ban the use of AI for one thing, I said I would ban it for giving your team members kudos on Slack or like sending wishes and stuff like that.
Ah, I like that answer. That's
Potentially,
brilliant.
because I feel like, let's leave all the rest to AI, but when it comes to appreciating people, right? Or,
Mm-hmm.
in this case, healing people, right? Leave that to the humans. So, I feel like we should keep our eyes on what the AI is actually for, what it's supposed to do, give it the work that, we can automate, just like we did with the Industrial Revolution, for example, right?
Yep.
But not the human to human interactions that should remain preserved.
Yeah, my answer was going to be the doctor-patient interaction, but it comes from the exact same place, which is,
Yeah.
as much as we as physicians bring vast storehouses of knowledge and, years of training and all of that experience to every patient interaction that we deal with. One of the reasons that we kept New Hope a patient to doctor interpersonal relationship is exactly that point, which is that there are moments when we interact with others that we want to feel heard, we want to feel listened to, we want to feel appreciated. And whether that's me taking the time to appreciate what you've done and reward you with a kudo, an accolade, or whatever, or whether, you're the patient in my exam room, what you want, if you've chosen to come to this venue, i.e. you're not opening up, askmymedicalquestion.ai or whatever, and, typing in what your symptoms are and getting a response. If that's the interaction you're looking for, I think I just saw one company pushing the envelope on that in the last 24 hours. So I think you'll have that opportunity. New Hope is designed that, yes, we use AI to build business efficiencies. We use AI to double check our clinical thinking. We use AI to help us write school notes and letters and all of those other things that everyone else is implementing as well. But when it comes to the doctor-patient relationship, we use AI to push everything else out of the frame. And when you are in the room, the 15, 20 minutes, hopefully more, that we get to spend with you, it's just our conversation.
So the idea is to make room for the human interactions, not to replace them.
And that's from the top down, that's the central hypothesis of New Hope, right? Like, having the AI answer the front desk is exactly that. Like, if we have all of those questions organized, taken care of, fed into our medical record system in a highly reliable and auditable manner, what does that open the space for? Well, when the patient walks into the room or office, all of that is done. And so when they walk into the exam room, I don't have to check their insurance. I don't have to check their demographics like people in the early micro practices had to do. That time moves out of our precious one-on-one interaction time. Equally, we're working with our medical record vendor so that the family history, social history, all of the checkboxy things that we can move out of that visit, we're trying to. And we're being upfront with our patients because that's an investment for we're asking of our patients to make of their time to check out the checkboxes and everything. And our premise to them is the same, which is if you are interested in this very interactive, very rich one-on-one moments every time we have the space with you, we hope that you would be willing to take care of these checkboxes for us so that we don't have to do it in the exam room.
That's great. So one last piece while we're in this area of the conversation.
Yeah.
You also mentioned a category called human first, but AI reviews the work. And I was wondering if you could go a little bit deeper into that. So what kind of work falls into that category? Why did you decide that it makes sense for it to be in that category?
I will start with the clinical example, but I think probably more illustrative as a non-clinical example. So the clinical example is the HPI and diagnosis taking, because even though large language models and others are fantastic at traversing multidimensional spaces and building relationships between concepts in literally dimensions that we struggle to imagine. Like we could get 3 dimensions. If you're a sci-fi nerd, you might get the 4th dimension, the 5th dimension, but these things are in n dimension spaces. Like the human mind was not meant to rock that level of vectors. But equally, when you're taking the history of present illness, when you are that most critical point of diagnosis, equally, or at least up until now, technology hasn't been able to build the engine that can draw in the right milieu of context. And that part of that is experience, right? Like, it's not just a matter of jamming a textbook of medicine into the context window and saying, what pattern does this patient most closely match? And what is the next question I need to answer? There's still this uncomputable component of it that the physician that is experienced, and those of you that have had the experience of training other physicians, you know what I'm talking about. But when we're building these pathways in our trainees, but there's still an uncomputable component yet around how do I, given what's likely in this population, what's likely in this setting, what's likely with this, patient demographic, there's just that filtering of context is something that the human brain is just better at than an AI right now. That being said, the literature is well documented on how rapidly medical knowledge is expanding, right? Differently, I hope that you would never tolerate a physician that doesn't have an AI assistant in this day and age, because the probability that they have forgotten a piece or just aren't aware of a piece of medical literature is rapidly, potentially even exponentially growing. And unfortunately, it is much easier for us to update a model than to train all of our physicians. At most, your physician, if you're in an academic setting, you might have the benefit of grand rounds. You might have the benefit, you might be really rock star keeping up with your journals. A lot of physicians, they get to their specialty college once a year and they get their annual updates and it's jammed into them, and then they get back to their practice because they can't take more than a few days off. And so we've got a very long cycle of updating the knowledge base of our physicians. Whereas if we need to update a model or update literature, we can push that once the model is developed, refined, and ensured that it is safe in 24 hours. So to summarize, I think the process of diagnostics, the collection of the most critical history, is something that 100% as of today needs to be human to start, but equally we should not accept that interaction without a very large corpus of data readily referenceable by the clinician in time for the clinical workflow. And based on those requirements, the reader can make their own determination around whether or not I'm defining what a language model can do or not do.
Yeah, and I think there's particular truth to this because I don't know if you've encountered this, but I'm seeing it more and more where even if the doctor doesn't have an AI assistant, the patient coming in, they're
Oh,
getting an AI
100%.
second
I
opinion.
hope so.
They're
Especially where we're standing up, like when we chose a target market, we chose a very heavily, a target audience, demographic that was very technology enabled, because
yeah.
again, part of our proposition is please be patient with us. We're implementing, iterating on, and designing and helping to implement all of these technologies. There's a payoff for it where, we are making our appointment times longer than anyone else's. We are doing this all within fee for service. So there's no concierge fee, there's no direct patient care fee. And so that's part of our recognition. But 100%, that very same population that we're targeting also goes to lookupmydiagnosis.ai, and
Yeah.
100% is like, I think I have Waldenstrom's macroglobulin or some completely rare disease that
Yeah.
I've never seen in my practice lifetime. And it is what it is. Just to close the loop, the non-clinical example of where I think human first but AI supporting is in a lot of creative ventures. So, I know that a lot of the creative industries are rightfully very concerned about the way AI is being implemented. And, there's lots of AI image generators and AI music generators and things like that, and entire video generating now, or AI actresses.
Yeah.
And so I would say that I think the right place is where AI frees humanity to be the creatives that we are and helps us build and draw in the lines. I was listening to a YouTube video by an AI educator, and
Right.
she was mentioning that she used AI to build a comic book. And she was very good at the storytelling. She was very good at the storyboarding. She wanted to do that human in the loop, and she did. But she doesn't have the artistic talent. And so
Mm.
she implemented a human and AI, workflow where, she developed the first part. The AI did the various images, and then she pieced them together, did the editing and piecing. And so I thought that
Yeah.
that was even a more accessible, but also interesting example of where I think, humanity will learn to take advantage of technology to everyone's betterment.
Yeah, it's true that, for creative endeavors, AI can fill in that, that gap that is the only thing standing between you and exploring a medium like creating comic books. For example, I run a different podcast, just personal, aside from
Uh-huh.
scaling practice management, and I'm great at running podcast conversations, if I do say so myself. And on this podcast, uh, what I'm quite bad at though is graphic design, right? And
Uh-huh.
so just for simple graphics for my podcast, I did leverage AI a little bit just to give it, a little more visual flair. Obviously, this is, just the first draft kind of thing. As it goes on, maybe I'll have a human designer actually do it properly, But for a first draft, AI can help with that. Either
100%.
way, so moving on to a little bit of a different area of
Okay.
this conversation, I wanted to talk more from the perspective of business strategy.
Sure.
One thing that you mentioned in the previous conversations of ours is how you're approaching overhead. So you mentioned
Yeah.
that, a typical practice can run at like 65, even up to 80% overhead, and you're targeting a much lower number. So could you tell us about how you're going to get there, what that number is, how you're aiming to actually get there?
Yeah. So you're exactly right. Our internal target is to have our overhead be somewhere between 25 and 35% of revenue.
Mm-hmm.
And there are lots of assumptions that go into that modeling, like, patient panel, appointment sizes, and all of those sorts of things. But I don't think this is going to be a new make or break or a new idea to the audience, but we're doing the very same things in this startup and in this experiment that large corporations are. So we're taking a look at our tasks, figuring out what goes into each of those buckets, and then from the ground up, designing a staffing model that is, essentially the bare minimum of what we need to do for our human only tasks, as well as our human first AI review tasks, as well as our AI first human review tasks. And so, certainly at the initial startup levels, that's just the provider in the office. And everything else so far, we've been able to outsource either to, service as a service, be to become, type constructs or business to business type relationships. Other places we've implemented technology, such as Talkie and other solutions, to take care of those tasks. And so, up front, that's where we're hoping to change the way that these practices run, is by shifting the staffing matrix inside the office, revisiting what our costs are, whether they need to be traditional costs, and sharing that back, i.e., as we mentioned, investing in the doctor-patient relationship. I think there are going to be some places where we get that right in the experimental phase, and obviously there are going to be places where we get that wrong. I think a great
Mm.
example is my wife is also, we met in training, so she's also an internist and informaticist, and
Okay.
she's going to be seeing patients 1 day a week in the clinic. And she wanted a day off in the practice because she's going to be taking the kids somewhere. And she emails me and she's like, "Can you block my schedule this day?" And realized, like, in our startup phase, I'm the, I am that person. I have to block her schedule. If once we scale to, like, our initial site is going to be able to support anywhere between 8 and 10 providers, I'm not going to be able to keep up with everyone's schedules
Yeah.
or things
Yeah.
like that. So to summarize, our notion of the provider only micro practice may only survive stage one, and we'll learn as we go as to, again, what can we keep in house? What can we automate? There may be a point where screen automation or even our EHR vendor gets to the point where, either they implement an AI first solution or we do, where it can block a clinician's calendar or accomplish other tasks for them. We'll see.
That's actually really interesting to think about because, I mean, you mentioned staffing, right?
Yeah.
And I understand that, there's this, you mentioned this provider only practice. So the only person
Yeah.
physically at the practice is the provider. I do wonder, though, as the scale increases, I'll relate this to a marketing example, for example.
Yeah.
What we're seeing is, and, this is even happening, at Talkie, is that, we people are wearing more hats because AI
Yes.
is making it possible, right? So previously, a salesperson, for example, some of our salespeople have become independent or mostly independent from the marketing department, because an AI agent can really, feasibly create some marketing content for them, run their social media profiles, stuff like that. So the shift is happening from, I'm just, you could have been specifically like a sales closer, to now you're not just like an opener and closer.
You're a
You're
generalist.
also, you're just a growth generalist and running marketing. Your agents are running the marketing as well. So you're like the full package. I wonder if or how this also translates to the medical context of, maybe somebody used to be a receptionist only, but now they have more of a generalist, role. I wonder what you're seeing here or predicting might come into the picture in the future.
Oh, this wasn't on our question list. This is where I may get in trouble with my colleagues, but I'm gonna say what I'm gonna say.
Okay.
I think the same thing relates to the practice of medicine, actually. In other
Okay.
words, I think that there are subspecialties, certainly of medicine, where AI makes more sense. Things where it's a standard set of tests that you're going to order. It's a standard set of outputs. And the British Medical Journal did a series on the value of physical examination. I encourage folks, if they're interested, to find it. By the way, it will be difficult because of what they were finding. But the summary there, to the point for this podcast and the point for our conversation, is that I do think that there are going to be places in internal medicine, entire subspecialties of medicine, where an AI will do at least a good job, if not, dare I say,
Wow.
potentially even better, because of some of those things that I mentioned, like the ability to keep an AI up to date and things like that. And so I do think that there may be a model where a generalist clinician in the room, with the support of appropriate technology, might be able to do subspecialty level care. And I think that in medicine, we need to think about what that looks like. How do we ensure that that is safe? How do we ensure that that meets our definitions of high reliability, our goals for how we interact with our patients, our way of keeping ourselves as clinicians up to date? But, there's the same thing that's happening in other industries is then, okay, in medicine, do we all become service oriented? Do we all become proceduralists? And everyone is performing surgery or delivering babies or all of these things where you need, we don't have robots to catch babies yet. And I say that, and perhaps my facial expressions are giving me away. And maybe there will be a day where that is the safer, more desired outcome. I think we need to think about what that world looks like. But to the point to our conversation is, I do think that even inside the holy grail of, the practice of medicine, I do think we are going to find places where some subspecialties may just be more amenable to a technology-first strategy.
Very interesting. So, not to pull on a thread that's already a hot take, but are you able to name any subspecialties that you think might become AI first or AI only in the future?
I think so. I just defined it, which is there are certain subspecialties that don't have a lot of procedures, if any procedures. Infectious disease, endocrinology, perhaps even nephrology, things like that. And I'm not like, this is going to be where your podcast gets bombed, by the way, and clinicians are going to line up with pitchforks and threaten to throw you off the
They're
air.
going to sign up for a conversation with me to present the other view, and that's how we'll get famous. So keep going.
I am in for it, 100%.
Okay, great.
So let me be more abstract and say, I think there are places in medicine where the additional information that we need to elicit in the history is amenable to an algorithmic approach. And there are places in medicine where the data that is most valuable in reaching one conclusion or another is accessible in electronic formats. In other words, like if I'm in the middle of surgery and I see that the texture of tissue doesn't seem to be ending. Maybe the cancer has unfortunately spread further than I thought. Maybe in the operating room, I make the decision to resect a little bit more or what have you. That level of data, that is going to be brutally difficult for even cameras to visualize. Sometimes it is a surgeon's hands feeling the texture that recognizes this tissue doesn't feel the way that I think it is. Those sorts of things, until we develop, cyberpunk levels of, robotic limbs that have textile inputs and things like that. I think until we get to that point, yeah, that's not the place in medicine that I'm talking about. But I think equally, any of the listeners will be able to come up with what they think their short list is without me getting even more hot water. How's that?
Understood. And now we've mentioned Cyberpunk and Star Wars. This is really interesting. I'm glad I asked the question, even if it wasn't on the list. We sometimes go off the list on the
That's
show.
fine.
That's what keeps it interesting. All right. So, and speaking of which, we could be talking about a whole lot more here, but I have a feeling we'll have a chance to do that maybe in a follow-up episode or maybe like a webinar in the future. For today, though, our time is unfortunately at a close. So, as one of the last few questions, Zeeshan, could you share with the watchers and listeners where they can find you, follow you, learn more about you, or have a conversation with you?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, within a few days, you'll be able to find us at newhopeprimarycare.com, which is going to hopefully go live in a day or two. I just looked at the final wireframes, and
Excellent.
Unlock has done incredible work there. Other than that, please, I'm on LinkedIn, as just about everybody is. Feel free to find me, or if you see me at a conference or anything, let's go out for coffee. That would be fantastic.
Great. Excellent. Is there anything that you would like to, as we close off the episode, highlight or maybe add on top of what we already shared, or something that you want to kind of double underline based on everything that we shared? Speaking to practice managers of the world, what should they remember from this one?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is to think about the efficiencies or the advantages that these technologies and other technologies bring to the table. Know what it is you're trying to get out before you walk into the implementer's room, i.e., hopefully before you walk into the sales room, because Jakob, you guys do a great job, but we've got to know why we're walking in before we ever get exposed to your silver tongues. And equally, consider, if you can, sharing some of that efficiency, some of that advantage with your patients, where, I recognize that, we have people we're trying to take care of. This is a very human problem that's being exposed by all of this efficiency in the way we do knowledge work now. And I would say, if at all humanly possible, think if you can give your patients a few more minutes or a different experience. Again, if it worked for Disney, it might work for you.
Excellent. And way to tie it back to almost the very beginning of the episode. I love that. So, if you want watchers and listeners to learn more about AI, how it can help at your front desk, definitely go to talkie.ai. I mean, I suppose I should say, based on what you just said, do some round of education on your own. Maybe talk with one of the AIs about it, or just do some good old-fashioned Googling. We definitely encourage that. We also think there is value in a conversation directly with one or more of companies such as ours to shop around, find out what the AI can and cannot do. Some practices that we speak with are surprised by how much it can do on top of what they already imagined. Sometimes it's a different kind of conversation, but I think this is something that practices should be doing, at least educating themselves. Not everybody's going to go all in just yet. Not everybody's going to be AI first in the way they build their practices, but at least AI aware is what I think practices should aim for. For right now, though, thank you, Zeeshan, very much for coming on the show and for sharing your insights. Excited to work with you as you build New Hope and as your practice develops. And you watchers and listeners, don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button on the way out, rate and follow us on the podcast platforms. But most of all, thank you so much for joining us here today. This has been Scaling Practice Management. I have been Jakob Greitzer, and I'll see you next time. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.